Revenge with Karen.
The receipt said 12 industrial air purifiers. The warehouse log said 6. And somehow, the final payment summary had a handwritten note. Approved, M. Keller, that was me. I stared at the document like it might rewrite itself if I blinked long enough. But it didn't. Just another day at Hawthorne Systems, where compliance meant just sign off on it, Meredith, and stop asking questions. You learn to stop twitching when red flags slap you across the face. Learn that the people above you, the ones with family trees tangled through the boardroom, don't make mistakes. They make revisions. And if you push back, well, HR starts using phrases like misalignment of temperament and impact on team cohesion. So I made a copy for myself, initialed it like a good little cog in the corporate contraption, and added it to the folder I kept in the locked bottom drawer of my desk. The one labeled in tiny, careful print, Future Archaeology. Now might be a good time to hit that subscribe button and give this story a like. Seriously, it tells the algorithm gremlins that this tale of slow-burning, spreadsheet-fueled chaos was worth your coffee break. Helps our little crew keep doing what we do best, turning workplace nightmares into oddly satisfying revenge stories. Back to the mess. The CFO's nephew, Jordan, had joined the procurement team 3 months earlier, fresh off a marketing degree, and a LinkedIn profile that looked like it had been assembled by an unpaid intern with access to a buzzword dartboard. His greatest achievements so far included scheduling a cake for his own welcome lunch and calling me Marion twice in the same meeting. But he had a last name that matched someone on the executive floor, which meant he got invited to strategy meetings, and I got asked to be a team player when invoices didn't line up. It started slowly. One payment approval that felt off, a misstated contract extension that no one could explain, a vendor profile with a tax ID that didn't match any IRS database. Every time I raised a concern, I got a variation of the same response. That's above your pay grade, or we've got it handled. And still, they wanted me to sign. Because a clean approval from the compliance team made the dirt smell like air freshener. It wasn't always like this. I started a decade ago. There were people in leadership who actually read the policies we were enforcing, who believed audit prep meant telling the truth, not staging a Broadway production for external reviewers. But they were gone now, retired, forced out, or slowly drowned in bureaucratic quicksand. The ones who remained either looked the other way or were too busy polishing their resumes to care. I stayed. Not out of loyalty, God, no, because I wanted to see how deep the rot went. And maybe, in some stubborn, twisted way, I wanted proof. Not just a hunch or a vague discomfort, but cold, time-stamped receipts. So I started keeping records, emails, memos, PDF versions of invoices that later got revised, even audio clips when conversations took a turn. And I never spoke a word of it. My reputation at the company was dependable, which is HR speak for won't rock the boat, even when she sees water pouring in. I nodded when asked to do the impossible. I worked late without complaint. I brought muffins on birthdays. I was wallpaper, which meant no one noticed when I stopped asking questions and just started collecting answers. One afternoon, I was handed a summary of consultant expenses for a vendor I didn't recognize. 4 payments of $18,750, just below the threshold that would require board approval. I searched the system. No contract, no deliverables, I asked Jordan. Oh yeah, that's from the AI advisory team, he said, chewing on a pen like it was a Slim Jim. We didn't keep the full contract because it had sensitive stuff. Sensitive like what? Like NDA type stuff. Anyway, CFO already said it's legit. And that was that. The CFO says jump and we're halfway to the moon. I signed it, added a copy to the drawer. That night, I stayed late. I printed off the first 10 entries in my growing archive, cross-referenced every discrepancy, labeled every file. It was beginning to look like a novel, a really boring, damning novel with footnotes and legally actionable subplots. I didn't know then how soon I'd need it, or that the final straw would be so stupid, so petty, it would almost be funny if it didn't trigger a corporate meltdown that made Enron look like a bookkeeping error. But I do remember the email subject line that hit my inbox the next morning: mandatory town hall apology script. The sender, HR, the subject, me. And that's when the countdown started. It happened in the bland, windowless conference room they always used for pre-audit prep. One of those spaces where fluorescent lights hum loud enough to kill thoughts. The chairs were designed to punish posture. Jordan had slouched in with his usual smug grin, spinning a company-issued pen like he was auditioning for a fidget toy sponsorship. He tossed a stapled packet onto the table and cleared his throat like he was about to read the Constitution. "Okay," he began, way too loud for 8:15 a.m., so I've streamlined the procurement workflow for vendor reconciliation. Basically, skip the line item matching if the monthly total aligns within a variance of 5%. Big picture efficiency. I paused mid-sip of my lukewarm coffee and looked up. That's not how procurement compliance works. Jordan blinked like I'd just insulted his mother. I checked with ops. They said it's fine. Operations can't override compliance protocols, I said calmly. That 5% leeway, it only applies to non-inventory services, and even then, only with dual sign-off and justification attached. He gave a theatrical sigh, looked around the table like we were all supposed to be impressed by how difficult I was being. "Meredith, I think you're getting lost in the weeds again." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't do what I wanted to do, which was stand up and throw his expense report into the trash can it belonged in. I simply reached for the policy binder I had bookmarked and slid it across the table. "Page 42, section 3.7. You'll find the rule there." What I didn't see, what none of us saw, was the invisible tripwire I had just stepped on. Jordan didn't respond. He just sat back, fake smiled, and said, "Cool. Thanks for that." He was out of the room before the meeting officially ended. I figured he'd sulk and passive-aggressively delete my access to something minor, like last time. But Jordan didn't go back to his desk. He went to his uncle, the CFO, and spun his wounded pride into a tale of unprofessional tone and hostile correction in front of colleagues. By the time I returned to my desk, I had a meeting invite from HR marked urgent. They were already waiting when I walked in. Two of them, Janine from HR and some new guy in a navy polo who introduced himself as internal culture liaison, which I guessed was a fancy name for company spy. Janine smiled in that plastic way she did when she was about to serve bad news disguised as a coaching opportunity. "Meredith, we've had a report come through regarding your communication style during this morning's meeting," she said, like she was reading from an actual script. "It seems your approach may have caused discomfort for one of your peers." I blinked. "You mean Jordan? We're not naming names," the guy in the polo cut in. "Right?" I said, folding my hands in my lap. "So what part exactly was problematic? Quoting company policy or pointing out a procedural error?" Janine leaned in like we were sharing secrets. "It's not always what we say, but how we say it. The leadership team believes it would be beneficial for you to take the opportunity to reaffirm your commitment to positive communication during Friday's town hall." I stared at her. "You want me to apologize? On camera, to the whole company?" "Not an apology," the polo guy said quickly. "Just a brief statement about professional tone and team collaboration. We've drafted something. You'll read it during the live stream." They slid a paper across the table. It was titled Statement of Alignment. It used phrases like miscommunication, unintentional tension, and learning opportunities. Not once did it mention the word truth. "Read like a hostage note written by a PR intern during a panic attack." I didn't say no. I didn't argue. That's what they expected. That's what the trap was built for. Resistance would trigger warnings, maybe suspension, maybe worse. Instead, I nodded, took the paper, and left the room without a word. I walked back to my cubicle, past Jordan's empty desk. He wasn't there, probably still basking in his little victory. I sat down, opened my drawer, took out the binder marked Future Archaeology. Flipped to the section labeled Procurement Discrepancies. Jordan G. 37 entries. Email trails. Invoices. A voice memo of him saying, "I'll just fudge it for now, they never double-check." All dated, all time-stamped. Then I opened a new folder on my encrypted drive. Titled it Appendix C. I knew what was coming. I could feel the corporate machinery warming up to grind me into a lesson for anyone else thinking of quoting policy to a golden boy. But I'd been here too long. I'd seen too much. And they were going to learn, very painfully, that the quiet ones are usually the ones keeping the receipts. They thought they could shame me into silence. Instead, they gave me a microphone. It was 10:43 p.m. when the printer in my living room let out its signature wheeze and coughed out the last page of Appendix C. 212 pages of calm, quiet damnation, printed on high-gauge white stock and 3-hole, punched like a church newsletter. I slid the stack into a black binder I'd picked up 6 months ago, back when I first realized this company wasn't just broken, it was organized in its dysfunction, like a cult that worshipped plausible deniability. I labeled the spine with a single block letter sticker. See, nothing fancy. I wasn't building a manifesto, I was building a mirror. And tomorrow they were going to look into it. The contents weren't dramatic, at least not to a stranger. No dramatic whistleblower exposés or sexy headlines. Just numbers, logs, screenshots, audio transcripts, dates, signatures, gaps, spreadsheet titled Discrepancies Unresolved CFO auth that ran 89 rows deep. My personal favorite? A $62,400 payment labeled Office Security Consulting routed to a shell company whose website had a stock image of a smiling man in a headset named Greg. Greg's LinkedIn profile said he was a barista in Des Moines. Each entry was cross-referenced. Chain of custody documented. Time-stamped, like an obsessive love letter to truth written by someone long past caring about being liked. I didn't eat dinner, didn't drink wine. I sat in silence, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a weighted blanket and dares you to flinch. This wasn't vengeance. This was insurance. Because I knew something most people in my position didn't learn until it was too late. Corporations don't fight fair. They don't need facts. They just need framing. It already set the scene. Difficult employee, communication issues, resistance to change. All they needed now was a conclusion, so I wrote one for them. At the front of the binder, I inserted a single sheet, bold font. Centered, it read, Appendix C compiled and maintained by M. Keller, disclosure authorized if compelled by internal, legal, or reputational retaliation. Contact, legal counsel redacted. I placed it in a fireproof lockbox under my bed. I backed up the full digital file to a thumb drive with 256-bit encryption, stored in my safety deposit box. Another copy went to an encrypted cloud account, accessible only through an account in my sister's name. I wasn't just covering my ass, I was building a firewall. When the livestreamed town hall was announced, the internal calendar update hit with passive-aggressive precision. All staff, culture, and communication alignment session. There was a note from HR beneath it. As a valued team member, Meredith will be leading off with a message on growth mindset. Growth mindset. Translation, she stepped out of line and now she'll bow before the altar of corporate civility. I laid out the outfit I planned to wear: gray slacks, navy blouse, simple chain necklace. Professional, neutral, forgettable. I wanted the message, not the messenger, to be the thing no one could unhear. I practiced the script they gave me, line by soulless line, until I could say it with deadpan precision. Then, at the very end, I added my line. The line they didn't write, the line they'd never expect. And I apologize, I said to my reflection, eyes locked on my own, for documenting the violations listed in Appendix C. I didn't smirk, didn't blink. Just let the words hang there like a dropped match in a room full of gas leaks. I practiced the delivery 5 times, not dramatic, not angry. Calm, professional, devastating. This wasn't rebellion. It was choreography. They gave me a stage and a spotlight. All I had to do was choose the moment to flip the script. It would be the last thing I ever said as an employee of Hawthorne Systems. But it would be the first thing they'd remember when everything around them began to crumble. Because you can't bury what's already archived. And when the house of cards falls, everyone looks for the index. Room was so cold I could hear the HVAC grumble in the ceiling tiles. One of those sterile conference rooms with no windows, no art, and a faint smell of panic sweat baked into the carpet. The long white table gleamed under the overhead fluorescence like a surgical tray. And in the far corner, the company's internal comms team was setting up the live stream equipment. 2 cameras, a mic clipped to my collar, a ring light meant to soften tension. Folding screen behind me bore the company's logo, and one of those vague slogans that meant absolutely nothing. Together forward. HR had already arranged my talking points in a crisp blue folder with my name embossed on a sticker, like I was being awarded Employee of the Month, instead of being publicly tarred and feathered. Janine sat 2 seats down, pretending to fuss with her phone. The culture liaison guy was there too, sipping coffee and offering performative nods of encouragement. They both avoided eye contact like it might trigger an HR violation. Then, right before go live, the CFO walked in. No greeting, no eye contact, just a brisk nod to the AV team and a muttered, "Let's get this over with." He sat directly in my line of sight, arms crossed, mouth set in a line of contempt so sharp you could slice office gossip with it. Jordan wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. Done his part. Now Uncle CFO would handle the cleanup. The red light blinked on. I was live. A producer's voice buzzed in my earpiece. 30,000 staff across locations. You're up in 3-2. I opened the folder. Good morning, I began, smooth and steady. I want to take a moment to address concerns raised recently regarding a pre-audit planning session. First, I acknowledge that communication is a two-way street, and in that instance, could have approached things with more collaborative intent. The words burned coming out, but I didn't flinch. I kept my voice flat, professional. Like a hostage reading, a ransom demand with proper punctuation. I recognize that our strength as an organization comes from our ability to work through challenges together, and I'm committed to growing from moments that reveal where we can do better. Janine gave a subtle, approving nod, like a stage mom mouthing along to her kid's school play. Then I closed the folder, paused, met the CFO's eyes dead on, and I also want to take this opportunity, I said, clear as a bell, to apologize for documenting the violations listed in Appendix C. Silence. A beat longer than anyone was comfortable with. Then, crash. The CFO shot up like someone had hit him with a taser, his chair slamming backwards into the wall with a sound that made the AV guy flinch and drop his clipboard. What appendix? The earpiece crackled. Someone in comms was yelling, mute her mic. Mute her, too late. The damage was done. In less than 10 seconds, I saw the entire pyramid of power at Hawthorne Systems crack like an old porcelain plate. Janine turned pale. The liaison looked like he wanted to slide under the table. One of the junior IT techs holding the livestream tablet whispered, "Oh my God," not even trying to hide it. I stood up calmly, removed the mic from my collar, smoothed my blouse. No one stopped me as I walked out. I passed employees in the hall who had been watching on the lobby screens, some with frozen stares, some slowly turning to look at each other like they'd just witnessed a ghost crawl out of the server room. My phone buzzed. 3 new voicemails. One from legal, one from the board secretary, one unknown number with a blocked ID. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I headed to my car, turned on the ignition, and drove straight to the notary office where my resignation letter was waiting, signed, stamped, and time-stamped as of 7:04 that morning. A copy had already been delivered to the board's confidential inbox. Another sat in the inbox of an outside law firm whose retainer was quietly activated a week ago. The rearview mirror, the building looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it was just shrinking under the weight of everything it had ignored for so long. They wanted me to grovel. Instead, I gave them a table of contents. And now, the whole company was about to start flipping pages. The building was on fire, and no one had noticed the smoke until I lit the match on live camera. By the time I was 2 blocks away, they'd shut down the stream. Internal comms sent out a generic technical difficulties memo. The link to the town hall went dead, but not before it was screen recorded by a dozen staffers across 3 continents and forwarded faster than a rumor about layoffs. One clip, just 8 seconds long, was already circulating on the employee Slack with the caption, Appendix C. Inside the walls of Hawthorne Systems, the fallout hit like a gas leak meeting a spark. The first call came from legal. Paralegal was dispatched to HR within 10 minutes of the broadcast ending, demanding access to Appendix C. Janine, still shaken, stammered that she didn't know what that was. The liaison guy tried to deflect, calling it a misstatement made under pressure, but the paralegal wasn't buying it. Compliance doesn't joke about documentation, he said flatly. Where's her archive? The HR office, suddenly full of people who just watched me become a human bombshell, began searching my digital footprint. They locked my email, froze my user account, called IT to mirror my hard drive. When they accessed my desktop, all they found was a single folder labeled meeting minutes. Inside it, a JPEG of a post-it note that read, check the footnotes. Meanwhile, the CFO was melting down. He'd stormed into the executive wing, barking orders, demanding to know who had approved my speaking slot, why he hadn't been warned, and, most importantly, what the hell was in Appendix C. He's pacing like a zoo animal, someone whispered to a colleague on Teams chat. That message, too, got screenshotted and leaked. Within an hour, a dozen people had been pulled into private calls, most of them mid-level managers who had signed off on something they probably shouldn't have. One of them, according to a friend in procurement, threw up in the bathroom. Another asked if whistleblower protections applied retroactively. Back at HQ's front desk, A courier delivered a thick envelope to the board liaison, hand-labeled and signed. It contained my resignation letter, printed on watermarked linen paper, with a certified notary seal affixed in the corner like a kiss goodbye. To the board of directors, it began. Per clause 9.3 of my employment agreement, please consider this notice immediate and irrevocable. For your convenience, have attached confirmation that this notice was filed at 7:04 a.m. this morning, well before the live-streamed event. Any further communication regarding my archive should be directed to the legal counsel retained under the engagement outlined in my severance clause. You'll find their card enclosed. The letter wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was structured like a formal compliance memo, because that's what it was. A polite, professional closing chapter to a long, ugly book, one they never thought I'd publish. Somewhere deep in the server logs, IT found a list of file names that had been encrypted and uploaded under my ID. They flagged one titled Appendix C Final PDF, but when they tried to open it, they got a password prompt. A senior sysadmin was brought in. He couldn't crack it either. They traced the upload time. It had been sitting on the shared drive for 6 months. Legal called a meeting. CFO attended via speakerphone. He was still yelling. "Do you understand how this looks?" He snapped. "This could trigger an audit." She mentioned violations, documented violations. "Do we know if it's real?" the general counsel asked. She said it on camera, another exec muttered. "Of course it's real." Could she be bluffing? Someone offered weakly. "She's a compliance analyst," came the reply. "She doesn't bluff, she footnotes." Meanwhile, I was already out of state. I drove straight through the night to a quiet town where no one knew what a Q3 variance was. I had a hotel room booked under an alias, a burner phone, and a box of peanut butter granola bars that I stress ate like they were sedatives. I slept for 4 hours and woke up to 22 unread emails, none from anyone I cared about. I opened my laptop, logged into the encrypted cloud account, checked the access logs. Sure enough, someone from the corporate server had attempted to download Appendix C. Failed 3 times. I smiled. The seeds were planted. The chaos had begun. I didn't need to push anything else forward. The systems I'd built were already doing that for me. They thought I was gone. They were wrong. I'd only gone quiet. The breakthrough came at 2:17 p.m. the next day. Someone from IT finally stopped trying to override permissions and did what they should have done 12 hours earlier. They checked the version history. The file had been uploaded to the secure shared compliance archive under my account exactly 184 days ago. Same file name, Appendix C Final PDF. The timestamp matched perfectly with the digital log I'd quietly updated during a wellness week in June. Everyone was too busy posting yoga selfies and gratitude posts to notice what was moving behind the scenes. Legal's senior analyst, a no-nonsense woman named Tasha who didn't suffer fools, or CFO, sat down her terminal with the company's encryption key archive. She tried 3 standard passwords. All failed. On the 4th, she typed in a sentence I'd used repeatedly in metadata tags over the years. Due diligence is not defiance. The file opened. First came the index, 42 categories of violations across 11 departments, spanning a 15-month period. Second came the footnotes, each violation cross-referenced to an internal system, date-stamped, and tied to one of 3 policy breach classifications, all written in calm, clinical language. No adjectives, no flair, just facts. Third came the evidence, PDF scans of signed approvals, email chains with requests flagged and ignored, app logs showing missing oversight checklists. There were even screenshots from Slack messages where managers joked about massaging data for board reports. Audio clips were embedded next, mostly from meetings. One, dated March 19, featured the CFO chuckling as he said, "Just float that contract under consulting. Nobody checks those line items." It went quiet in the room when that one played. Then the bombshell, a subfolder titled Board-Level Exceptions. Inside, 2 vendor contracts approved without a bidding process, both signed off by the CFO and countersigned by a board member. The signatures were digitally verified. One of them included a clause that rerouted compliance reviews through the CFO's office, effectively making oversight impossible. "That's her signature," Tasha whispered, pointing to the lower corner of the scanned PDF. "Meredith Keller?" someone asked. "No. Board Chair Deborah Whitmore." This went above him. Call was placed to outside counsel. Another to the board's audit committee. By 5:00 p.m., The file had been viewed in full by the legal team, outside compliance, and 3 board members. Each of them left separate notes in the review log. One note read, "Full chain of custody appears intact." Another, "She submitted 2 formal warnings prior to this, both closed without review." And one final comment, left by the board's legal counsel at 6:42 p.m. After reading entry #119, this wasn't sabotage. This was record keeping. Word spread fast. Department heads canceled meetings. Finance froze 2 active vendor accounts listed in the appendix. Procurement began auditing every contract from the last 18 months. Staff whispered in elevators, in bathrooms, in break rooms. The phrase Appendix C was spoken like it was cursed. People didn't ask what was in it, they asked if they were in it. The CFO, meanwhile, was holed up in his office behind closed blinds. An assistant left a glass of water outside his door, untouched. Jordan was nowhere to be found. And HR, Janine took an early leave of absence, citing medical fatigue. Her name appeared 6 times in Appendix C, always at the end of complaint threads that went unanswered. Somewhere quiet, far from the corporate hum, I sat in a cafe with a chamomile tea and watched the clouds roll in. Inbox pinged with a notification. Document accessed. Appendix C final PDF, view #6. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I'd already lived every page. I closed my laptop, took a sip of tea, serene, not because I'd won, but because they finally opened their eyes and saw the map I'd drawn in full detail. They didn't need my commentary. The signatures were there, the red flags, the silence after the warnings, the systems they bypassed, compliance they ignored, all of it. And now it was speaking without me. I never yelled. I never threatened. All I did was document. And now the paper was burning the house down. The front desk receptionist didn't even have time to offer them a visitor badge. At exactly 8:59 a.m. on a dreary Thursday morning, 2 agents from the Office of Regulatory Integrity walked through the front doors of Hawthorne Systems with a file folder and audit letter, the kind of expression that said, "We're not here for the coffee." No warning, no scheduling, no polite heads-up email to coordinate calendars. They were dressed in plain suits, but their arrival hit harder than any SWAT team. The receptionist tried to stall, something about needing to check with facilities. One of the agents calmly slid a letter across the counter and said, "Your compliance officer will know what this is. Please inform them that our 72-hour heads-up was waived due to recent developments." Those recent developments were still being whispered about upstairs, where the boardroom was already halfway through an emergency session, and the CFO had just finished saying the phrase "disgruntled employee" for the 4th time in under 10 minutes. This entire document, this so-called Appendix C, it's all stitched together by someone who wanted to make us look bad. "I've all seen the tone she took on that live stream," he said, flipping through printouts as if aggression alone would make timestamps disappear. "She waited to drop this until she was out the door. There's no chain of custody. It's garbage." He was halfway through that sentence when one of the board members slid a tablet across the table. On it, an internal metadata report compiled overnight. Last accessed, corporate server, 6:42 p.m. yesterday. Upload date 6 months ago. Ownership, M. Keller. Encryption, company key. Access log intact. Another board member added our outside counsel reviewed the signatures. Everyone matches. Chain of custody is clean, and now we have this. She tapped a printed email, folded at the corner. It was from the regulatory firm's intake department. Attached was a redacted portion of Appendix C, forwarded by an anonymous sender. Just 5 pages, enough to outline 2 unreported vendor relationships, 1 whistleblower suppression trail, and a pattern of misfiled compliance reviews routed through the CFO's office. It had been enough. The agency had opened a formal inquiry. And now they were here. Downstairs, the agents were escorted to the 10th floor by a silent compliance rep who looked like he might faint. By 9:15, they'd requested access to vendor contracts, expense reports, and 3 staff interviews. One of the junior accountants asked which quarter they were reviewing. The agent replied, "All of them." By noon, a second team arrived. These ones had laptops and a printer cart, a whole station. One of them even asked for Ethernet access. You knew it was serious when someone requested a wired connection in 2025. The CFO tried to intercept them. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, voice smooth like old cologne. Documents in question were compiled by someone who no longer works here. She had personal conflicts with certain team members. It's well documented. The lead agent looked up, unimpressed. We're not here because of her personal feelings, she said. We're here because of yours, specifically, your signature on unvetted contracts and your department's failure to disclose those to our office last quarter. He blanched. The audit room filled with quiet chaos. The managers pretended to look busy while deleting bookmarked shortcuts. Finance locked their Slack channels. Procurement initiated a full freeze on external vendors. HR posted a memo about pending compliance collaboration that might as well have read, "Brace for impact." One assistant was seen shredding paper in a supply closet like it owed him money. And all the while, Meredith Keller's name kept floating through the air like a ghost, unspoken in official documents, but unavoidable in every side conversation, every nervous glance, every memo that started with "per recent findings." She was gone, untouchable, unreachable, but her work was omnipresent. It had embedded itself in the system like a spine. Every document that had been skipped, every complaint that had been closed with a boilerplate response, every signature that had been scribbled in confidence, assuming no one would ever care enough to look. They were all there, still speaking, still screaming. And now they weren't just in the appendix. They were in the hands of the people who couldn't be ignored. The board began distancing themselves by afternoon. A new committee was announced to oversee internal investigations. The CFO's assistant was placed on temporary leave. HR stopped responding to emails about realignment initiatives. The company's internal newsletter, which had once celebrated innovation through trust, skipped its weekly edition for the first time in 6 years. No one dared say it aloud, but deep down they knew. This wasn't revenge. This was a warning. And they'd ignored it until it walked through their front door wearing a badge and carrying a subpoena. They combed through her inbox like it was a crime scene. Not just the inbox, they pulled archives, backup servers, cache folders, even her team's chat logs. HR, IT, and legal turned over every digital stone, desperate to find out who Meredith had told, who she'd warned, who might have known what was in Appendix C before it exploded in their faces like a grenade disguised as a policy memo. Someone had to know. Someone had to be helping her. No one woman could build something that precise alone, right? Wrong. But they didn't want to believe that. Because if Meredith had acted completely alone, it meant they'd been exposed by a single employee with a spreadsheet, a notary stamp, a memory like an elephant in wire-rimmed glasses. So they hunted ghosts. Ghosts she'd left behind on purpose. On Monday afternoon, the breakthrough came from a junior sysadmin named Jules, who didn't even know what she was looking for. While parsing through a routine export of Meredith's sent folder, she noticed something odd in the metadata of 2 emails from 5 months prior. Both had a single recipient in the to line. The delivery logs showed more than one address. Hidden in the header, a blind CC to an encrypted third-party domain. Not a personal email, not a journalist, a law firm, outside counsel, registered to a firm specializing in whistleblower protections and retaliation cases. The subject line of the first email, unreviewed compliance flags logged but not acknowledged. The second, board-level exceptions, early disclosures, chain of custody intact. Both had attachments. One was a document summary of the first 20 entries from Appendix C. The second included a notarized affidavit, timestamps, IP addresses, proof of non-alteration, every digital fingerprint in place. And that's when the dam broke. At 4:12 p.m., the board convened an emergency video call. 5 members logged in from out of state. 3 were already on site, their faces pale and pinched. 1 dialed in from a conference in Boston, sitting in a hotel hallway with headphones and a cup of coffee trembling slightly in his hand. The outside counsel Meredith had blind CC'd had responded just hours earlier, with confirmation. The disclosures were real. The protections were active. Any attempt to retaliate, overt or covert, would trigger an automatic escalation to the Office of Labor Compliance. The case had been assigned a tracking number. It was live. The board chair didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Simply said, "We can no longer afford to be neutral." The CFO, who had declined to join the call citing audit coordination demands, was formally suspended pending investigation. His access revoked. His badge deactivated. His name removed from the executive portal by 6:03 p.m. Janine from HR submitted her resignation an hour later. The liaison guy disappeared from the org chart by morning. Ripple moved through the company like a shockwave underwater. You couldn't always see it, but you could feel the pull. Directors updated their LinkedIn profiles, just in case. Slack channels went quiet. The phrase Appendix C was replaced with emoji code among employees, blue-locked, a locked book no one dared reference directly. Back in a quiet town 2 states away, Meredith sat in the corner of a quiet second-floor coffee shop, watching the rain drip in crooked lines down the window. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. But she was still and composed in a way that unnerved the few people in her life who knew her before all this started. A woman who used to triple-check birthday cards before sending them now moved with the assurance of someone who knew exactly what domino was going to fall next and had already labeled the tile. She sipped her coffee, refreshed her inbox. Single subject line waited there like a whispered secret. Confirmed, chain of custody accepted, no edits detected. She closed the email. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her hands were clean. But the records were radioactive. The system she'd worked inside for a decade had mistaken her silence for submission. But she hadn't been silent. She'd been recording. And now the recordings were testifying, without her even needing to be in the room, tapped against the high windows like it had something to say. Inside the boardroom, there were no PowerPoints, no fruit trays, just the sound of paper sliding across polished oak and the collective exhale of people realizing they'd been sitting on a bomb for years, and someone finally read the manual out loud. A general counsel sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 outside attorneys and a compliance auditor flown in on a red eye. The board chair leaned forward, fingers laced, face expressionless. Across from her sat the CFO, pale, tight-lipped, 1 foot tapping beneath the table like it might run if it could. Legal cleared her throat. No theatrics, just the calm gravity of someone whose words moved money and reputations. We're now reviewing page 49 of Appendix C. The section is titled, Kickback Trail Vendor Group 14, Phi Q2. She adjusted her glasses. Section documents a procurement stream approved by the CFO's office for a vendor, registered as Helix Solutions. Helix billed $378,000 over 9 months for consulting services without itemized deliverables. Payments were approved in staggered increments under $50,000 to avoid mandatory board oversight. All approvals bear the signature of, she stopped. Looked up, the CFO. He didn't argue. Didn't have to. The signatures matched, digitally verified, audit trail intact. But that wasn't the part that made his pulse scream behind his temples. Legal continued. Further, the bank record analysis, referenced in entry 49B, connects 2 wire transfers to an offshore account registered in Belize. The recipient account is listed under an umbrella firm connected to Helix Solutions founder. There's no reporting of these transactions in our previous SEC filings, nor any mention of foreign vendor payments in Q2 declarations. The boardroom went silent. It wasn't angry. It wasn't explosive. It was dead air, the kind that follows a car crash before anyone starts crying. The CFO opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw ticked like a clock winding down. The board chair finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Didn't disclose this in our SEC filings. Not a question, a statement, a funeral bell, because everyone in that room knew what that meant. It wasn't just a fireable offense. It was criminal exposure. SEC violations, financial misconduct, shareholder risk. This wasn't about Meredith anymore. This was about them. He tried to speak. It was, those approvals were, Helix was supposed to, but no one was listening. A quiet knock interrupted the spiral. Assistant leaned in, whispered to the board chair, handed over a printed email. She read it, then slid it across the table. Subject, formal notice of cooperation Appendix C chain of custody certified. Sender, Office of Regulatory Integrity, attached. Acknowledgement of protected disclosures. Case hash 2443-19A at the bottom, a single line in bold. Documentation confirmed. No alterations. Voluntary disclosure. Timestamp aligns with chain of events described. The CFO slumped back in his chair, the color draining from his face like spilled bleach. No one moved to help him. No one spoke his name. They just watched the truth finally land where it always should have. And a few miles away, in a quiet office lobby painted the color of old parchment and calm decisions, Meredith sat with a coffee in one hand and a laminated badge in the other. Her name, printed in firm sans serif, rested beneath a new title. Director of Ethics and Oversight, External Counsel, Wexler and Roth LLP. A receptionist walked past, paused, smiled. You settling in okay? Meredith nodded. I think so. Outside, the rain had stopped. The storm was over, not because she'd fought it, but because she'd outlasted it. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She didn't leak. She documented. And when the flood came, she had already built the ark. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.